So this is my round 10 game from the Australian Championships. I'm playing against FIDE Master Yi Liu. I've played him twice before and we have a 1-1 score. I won the first game, he won the second. Both I actually had the white pieces in this game. I also have white. I was lucky enough to have a double white these last 2 rounds. And the first time we played, actually, I played d4 and he after d5, c4, e6, knight f3, played c6 and we went for this sort of triangle. And I actually won in like less than 25 moves. So the next time he played, he avoided that and he instead went for a Catalan and he played this line of dc4, c6. An interesting sideline actually, but he wasn't too happy with that despite winning the game. And for this game, opted to go for something a little bit different where he goes for bishop b4 check. Of course, d takes c4 is known as the open Catalan. Various things you can do within it. Some like options are quite sharp, some are quite solid, and bishop b4 check probably fits the bill of being a bit more solid, I would say. When after bishop d2, which is what I did here, he goes for this move a5. You don't really want to take. This is sort of just playing into white's hands, especially if we can just take on c4 next and like you don't do anything about that. This is again like a dream Catalan, similar to what we looked at in the last video actually. This could even be a bit worse because dark squared bishops are being traded off, and dark squared, black's dark squared bishop is sort of their good one. So after this he played a5, which is the normal theoretical move. c5 is also an interesting thing, which I looked at briefly before the game. But okay, a5, and yeah, I mean, I hadn't spent too much time looking at this before the game. I had like a slight feeling maybe this would be something that Yi would go for. I can't really imagine Yi, to be honest, doesn't feel within his style to play like bishop b7 and go for like this classical mainline. I just couldn't envision that. He seems to like, he plays solid openings, but within those solid openings often tries to go for something a bit more dynamic. So something like in the open Catalan is sort of what I was expecting. And okay, we had this a5, and of course the idea is you protect the bishop and you'd be happy to see a transformation of structure like this. So white's main line for a long time has been queen c2, and this is what, I've played for a long time, but the sort of thing, and it's not really a problem per se, but it's just like the positions you get after the following sequence of moves, they're really well analyzed. Queen g5, you fork this pawn and this pawn. Castles, queen takes b5, bishop a6, all very forcing stuff so far. And here white has an option between queen takes a5 and queen a4. The problem with queen takes a5, so to speak, is that after bishop b7, which doesn't look like it's anything special, black can actually play rook takes a1 now. The queen is being hit, so is the knight. So white usually gives up their queen. Also, the reason why people don't usually go like queen b6, for example, it's far from simple, but like the issue is that with rook takes b1 check, king d2, there's actually this nasty c3 intermediate check where you can't really take for the pawn because the queen would hang, and if you take for the king, then you're gonna get forked. And I think also if you go here, then, well, at the very least is rook takes b2 with check. So that's why they usually go for this, but then you reach this position where, black essentially has very close to equal material. We're going to win back the pawn on the next move. I don't really regard this to be anything special. So the main move is to go queen a4. And again, okay, we have these moves, queen b6, castles, this, and bishop b5, very precise move when now white takes, they give up the queen temporarily, they win it back, and then you get this sort of endgame position where material is equal, black has this outside isolated a pawn, and you can try to grind this, but, it's a very, very small edge you're working with, and to be honest, I just kind of wanted something a bit more interesting in the game. There is also the sideline where knight e4 can happen with queen f4, black can go queen b6, and it really does require like precise play on white's behalf, and to be honest, this might be something a bit more in the style that Yi would go for. I kind of have a difficult time imagining he would really go for this, where he has no prospects of winning at all. Nonetheless, so I also kind of want to win this game. So yeah, I go a3 instead. And this is something I looked at a bit before the game, where you're basically forcing black to make a choice, decision with their bishop. They can go backwards, but they can also take here. This is the main move. I take back, b5 happens. Again, if they just play like nonchalantly, they just castle, I'm going to take here, a very good Catalan, you don't really want to go into it. So b5, you retain the extra pawn. b3, this is an important move. If you go c3, I don't really think this works because you can't really go b4 and hang on to the extra pawn. If you could, you would be winning because the knight would be trapped. But of course, if you do this, you lose the rook. And like if you could play 2 moves in a row, bishop b7, b4, you're golden. But unfortunately rather, that is not the case. So white's going to be able to take back the pawn, which is why people usually just do this and then play this position where they're up a pawn, but white definitely has typical sort of Catalan compensation. If you're not familiar with this sort of position, by the way, and you're interested, I mean, I've been playing the Catalan a lot this tournament, so if you've been keeping up with the recaps, you've probably picked up some stuff. But I, of course, have this video that's about 1 hour long, 20 ideas I believe every Catalan player must know. I talk a bit about these sort of positions there, but okay. Castles, and the whole crux behind, by the way, these positions, I should explain this a bit, is that, you know, white is down a pawn, of course, but you have these sort of open files on the queen side. This bishop is a little bit passive, it has no real clear way it can get active, and the hope is that eventually white's going to put these rooks here, maybe a pawn e3, outpost a knight here, move the queen out of the way, and basically just put pressure on black's rather queen side. Maybe the knight can also come to e5 and put pressure on c6 like this. Tough to say quite yet how exactly things will unfold. Black, of course, also has a say in the outcome of what exactly happens. So I play e3, and to be honest, this was already maybe a bit premature. What most people have done database, and I wasn't really remembering my stuff so well at this point, is they go rook fc1, they don't really commit with the e pawn yet, and this makes sense. I mean, whether or not you want to go e4 is maybe up for debate. Like, this seems a bit ambitious to me to try and like go e5 and like knight e4, knight g5 or something like that when you're down a pawn. It's playable, but it just doesn't really feel in the spirit of the position to me. But more so the point, I guess, would just be with rook c1, it's just sort of like you're just not really wasting the tempo playing this move e3, where it weakens the knight squares slightly. That's not a huge issue, but it's more so that you're just, d4 is already protected. e3 basically serves the primary function of protecting this pawn, whether we want to admit that or not. That's basically, well, its entire purpose. So when we understand that, we realize that e3 isn't really necessary, because our next moves are going to be like queen b2, which protects us. It's already protected by the knight. Then we move this knight here, and then that protects it even more. And then maybe we go c5 at some point. And if we really need to, then we can play e3. No need to rush, but okay, it's not like a huge mistake or anything. Okay, but e3, knight d7, rook fc1, and queen b6. So bishop b7, of course, also looks somewhat natural, but there is the idea maybe I can flirt with briefly if the bishop comes here. Then maybe I can play something like knight c4, for example, for him to like bring the knight in here. I can also just play knight e5, but the idea is, of course, that, you know, if they take, well, then the structure's been ruined, and I'm probably going to win back material. So knight c4, like, not forced. I mean, I could just play normally, like queen b2, knight b3, knight e1, this sort of thing, right? But okay, it's an interesting idea to think about sometimes. Queen b6 is what happens, and here I just go for the typical knight e1, knight d3, rook c8, and queen b2. It's worth noting that I had to think a little bit here about like what happens if, you know, black just plays c5. However, I calculated this doesn't really work, and the reason is that after d takes c5, knight takes c5, that I can just play rook takes c5, and I'm pretty much just winning material, because if rook takes c5, bishop takes b7, well, I have 2 pieces for the rook right now, and if they take, then I'm gonna just be a whole piece up. If they try taking here, then I have the intermediate check. I'm just a complete piece up here. They can try and like skewer me along here, but it just doesn't really work. Piece up again, which more or less makes this whole like c5 thing just not really work. So that's why he did not go for the c5 thing in the game, but I had to calculate it a little bit. It's not super difficult to figure out that it doesn't work, but of course, if you just calculate like the most sort of basic moves, like knight takes c5 or something, well then black is going to be gaining away with this, and there's just going to be a pawn up. So it's important to see this rook takes c5 detail, but nonetheless, okay, bishop a6 is what happens in the game, and sort of signaling that he wants to play b4 and open the bishop on this diagonal. So I play knight b3, which is what I want to play anyway. And now after b4, knight c5. It's also worth noting that if you go a4, this would be really catastrophic from a positional point of view. This is white's dream, basically, because now what you have is white having a complete blockade over the dark squares, basically, and there's not really any counterplay black can pursue. Maybe they even want to play b4, giving back the pawn, I don't quite know. But even though black is technically up a pawn in this position, it doesn't really mean much, because their pieces aren't really working together very well. If they could like transfer this bishop to a dark square or something, then they'd be doing fine, but not quite the case, unfortunately. So why b4 is played, trying to, you know, avoid this sort of structure, which doesn't really make too much sense. b4 makes a bit more sense, of course, opening the bishop up. and now after knight dc5, bishop b5 is played. So basically what Yi is saying is he wants to go a4, kick my knight away, and then maybe play b3. Of course, I'm not going to be okay with that. I have to do something if I want to avoid that fate. So what I decided to pursue was this move a takes b4. I was also thinking maybe a4, but realistically leaving this pawn as a protected passer on b4 probably is going to be quite a long-term risk. Like if I can work something up, I can get some counterplay with the king side, maybe it could work out. But the longer the game goes on, the more risky this sort of becomes. So a takes b4 is probably the best move, and black plays a takes b4. a4 is not really a concern because I'm just going to go like at the very least like knight a5, maybe I can go backwards even, and like okay, what is this really, this position for black, right? It doesn't really make sense. So like okay, this pawn is just weak, it didn't really lead to anything. So a takes b4 is the most logical move, and here I play queen d2, and I probably played this a bit too quickly because basically what happens is takes bishop c4, and now we get to this position where like okay, I'm down a pawn, but it felt like something clearly went a little bit wrong in these last few moves, where all of a sudden it felt like this position, I very clearly felt like I had sufficient compensation. Maybe I'm even playing with a little bit of an edge. Whereas once we get to this position, it felt like I'm kind of just down a pawn. They're putting some pressure on me. My pieces aren't really active enough to justify this pawn deficit. And I kind of had to start spending my time figuring out like how do I actually like hold this position together and not lose. So I spent like 20 minutes on my next move, but before I even get to that, like what sort of went wrong here, right? And I would say it started with queen d2 actually. I realized after I played my move that I very naively sort of did not consider this move rook takes a1, at least seriously, and should have instead probably played rook takes a8, and then queen d2, such that now what is happening is my rook is not being lured away from the c1 square, whereas helping protect this knight, such that now if knight takes c5, d takes c5, the queen cannot protect this pawn and itself at the same time. So maybe something like this happens. I win back the pawn, and to be honest, like from a human perspective, this position feels like white is a bit better, because this bishop is really awkward, this pawn is maybe arguably a bit weak, but okay, the engine is like, oh, black's equal after rook a4 or e5, stopping like knight d4, right? So can't really argue with that, but definitely it would feel, I would be very happy if I got this position in the game. Feels like there's very little risk, and I'm just gonna push for as long as I physically can. But okay, what ended up happening in the game is, again, queen d2. And now the issue is that after rook takes a1 here, the bishop c4, and before he couldn't go bishop c4 because my rook was controlling that square, right? But now after this, and it also turns out even knight takes a1 was better, which I realized again after I played like rook takes a1 almost automatically, because now I can recapture still for the pawn, and there's knight c2, I'm gonna be probably winning this back. If knight d5, just kick it out. Knight takes b4 equal. This probably isn't as good as this one in my opinion, but okay, I'm still at least not suffering like I sort of was in the game after bishop c4. Now when this is protected, the bishop might be coming to d5, trying to establish itself there. And again, I said that I, on this next move, spent about 20 minutes. And before like I started spending time playing my next move, we both had about an hour on the clock, but I knew this was probably an important moment to spend some time, because if I just blitz out the next few moves carelessly, my position could easily slide from like I thought maybe I'm slightly worse here, because okay, I'm a pawn down, but I still definitely have some compensation, because it's not like he can just easily push his extra pawn right on the queen side. But if I don't carefully babysit the slight advantage, so to speak, then like I could envision something going a bit wrong and my position going from slightly worse to like much worse. So I end up playing rook a4, which is a natural move, right? You attack the pawn, but I was calculating what do I do after rook b8, and my initial instinct was, okay, I want to go queen c2. And my issue with this was sort of the after bishop d5, which is a move I thought they wanted to play, but in reality maybe wasn't quite, and there were some other more serious things which I kind of overlooked. But okay, bishop d5, for example, takes d5, getting rid of their backward pawn on c6. Of course, I'm still down a pawn, but I was thinking like, okay, I can like win back that pawn probably with knight d3. Sorry, here knight d3, queen d6, and maybe I can go queen d2, add another attacker, and I'm golden. The issue is sort of that after knight e4, my queen is attacked. I don't really have time to win this pawn back, and if queen e1 keeps an eye over this, knight e3, and again, it's not really so easy to win back the pawn. In fact, I might just be clearly worse here at this point. So I realized that, and I was sort of like, well, I'm not sure I like that. So I started exploring this other option of queen c1. And my idea was now, by comparison with bishop d5, take, now I have this option of bringing the queen to e1, attacking the pawn, and unlike d2, there's no knight e4 with tempo. I'm just going to be, sorry, it was knight d3 first, queen d6, and then queen e1 rather, and again, there's no knight e4 with tempo. I'm going to be winning the pawn back. There's nothing in this planet of Earth that they can do. So this is fine, but the issue was, while I ended up deciding on queen c1, there was actually a much bigger issue of queen c2 than bishop d5. The issue was that they could actually play knight takes c5, and now if I take this b3, and it doesn't matter that I could win this bishop because b2 and they're going to be rushing through the pawn. If I play d takes c5, then they're going to play this intermediate move bishop takes b3, and this is absolutely no good. I am probably just done for. If I take, of course, this is also no good. So it was good that I did not go for queen c2, because it was this knight takes c5 issue. And also, if queen takes c4, I also do not imagine, sorry, probably this one's a bit stronger, that this is too great. So that is why I ended up playing, well, this isn't why I ended up playing knight takes, sorry, queen c1 rather. I didn't seriously consider that, and instead going queen c1, which is lucky because now if knight takes e5, d takes e5, this whole thing doesn't work. But that was like almost by chance, because my whole thing was bishop d5 for some reason. I thought, because remember when he played bishop c4, his idea in some sense was bishop d5, at least I thought in my head that's what it was. So I didn't really consider some of these other ideas as seriously as I should have. And in the end, he didn't go bishop d5, he went bishop takes b3, which is also sensible. And I didn't really consider this too seriously, but I thought like, okay, like I should be roughly okay here, and I think I actually am. So knight d5, queen c4, and the thing is still, I felt like, okay, like I have probably enough compensation to be holding this together, like just enough, but definitely I do not have an advantage. But of course here I have some annoying threats like rook a6 and taking c6, so not really being able to see of a way to properly deal with this threat. He plays queen b5, which is sort of what I was thinking during the game would be quite logical, forking this and this, more or less forcing my next move, queen takes b5, and now you have a choice between rook b5 or cb5. He ended up going cb5, which is interesting and probably objectively the slightly better move, because after rook b5, the issue is that like this pawn, it's always backward, it can be a target for attack. Also after rook a7, this knight, sort of what you do with it. I think the best move is knight b8, but at this point it's sort of like, well, it's gone to b8, where else does it go? And this is where you sort of realize, like, okay, white really does have some serious, maybe not even compensation, maybe even borderline pressure at this point. So c takes b5 made some sense to try and kick the rook out, and okay, these pawns doubled, so obviously not ideal from a structural point of view, but definitely still, I need to be careful to try and hold this position together. So I go rook a7, putting some pressure on this knight, which I thought was logical when it comes to b6. I think the engine preferred rook a5, which in hindsight, okay, maybe it makes some sense, because then you don't allow them to run with the knight and stuff. But okay, I played this, it's not too bad, knight c5. And I have some ideas, for example, like maybe knight e6, forking this and this. Maybe I want to like run the rook back now and scoop that pawn up. Can also try and reroute the knight. He plays g6. But it turns out that some of my sort of threats he could have ignored probably and gone like knight c3. And this is sort of like the summary of this endgame. It's very weird. There's a lot of like weird sort of things where black would play a bit more actively than they did in the game and maybe keep some like advantage, but it requires really just being constantly alert of all these ideas. For example, with knight c3, the point is knight a6, which seemingly focuses, and this does not really work because of b2. It's not the most difficult line to calculate in the world, but I guess during the game, you might have just like overlooked this, or just not really have seriously considered knight c3 altogether. So he instead plays g6, which makes sense, right? You want to clear the back rank. There was also g5 we were talking about after the game, which I thought was maybe a bit more logical of a way than clearing the back rank as opposed to g6, because at least here you can put the pawn on g4 and sort of create a bit of a bind on the king side. But okay, we thought like maybe it's interesting, but it's not going to probably change the evaluation of the position that drastically. But okay, g6 is what happens, and basically I'll just show how the next few moves unfold, and then we'll reverse engineer our way back to maybe what both sides could have done a little bit better. So rook a1, knight a4 happens, I bring my knight back, I attack the pawn, and now I can't really take this because knight c3, and well, my rook is being attacked, and I cannot move my rook to where it is also defending this knight, so I am therefore screwed. If I go rook c1 hoping for takes, rook takes c3, no bueno, that is going to be losing. So bishop takes d5 makes sense, getting rid of that knight, so now I can take this, and then we reach this position where I actually somehow won a pawn, but even so, I don't know what was going through Yi's mind, but even though I got this position and he sort of felt he screwed up and I sort of felt like, what is he doing? Even this is still equal because he basically just has enough compensation for the pawn, and eventually we get to this position later where we end up repeating moves. Yes, I'm a pawn up, but it's actually incredibly difficult to make any progress because my pawns can't advance easily, my king's cut off, this knight and rook work together very well, so a draw is a fair result. Objectively, there wasn't really a whole lot I could do, unfortunately, at this point. But some things like leading up to this, right, it was sort of interesting. Like rook a1 apparently was not that great because apparently there was this very subtle move black could go for, rook c8, which if at first it doesn't make any sense if you look at it because it hits a knight which is very firmly defended. Doesn't make that much sense. But the idea is if I say go rook b1 and just prepare to like go knight d3, takes b4 maybe, well there's going to be this move e5 which is very clever actually, attacking the d4 pawn, and strategically it makes things a lot more difficult for white to defend this position if d4 is an isolated and weak pawn, and of course we cannot take it because then the knight's going to hang, which is the whole idea behind rook c8. Also maybe you sometimes avoid these knight a6 to takes b4 forks, but yeah, very subtle idea. And you can also maybe try and attack like b5 or something to the bishop, but it doesn't really lead anywhere in particular, and black is actually just like a fair bit better in this position, but that's not trivial to see. And what that also means is that for white is that there was probably something better they should have done instead of rook a1. I think the better thing was like knight d3, try and bring the knight back, which is a bit counterintuitive because it's firmly holding this square together. But if black keeps trying to push the pawn, essentially white can hold things together like so, and after you take, you're going to go rook a3, come back and take this, and either way this is going to pretty much be fine. Knight takes d5, same story, not really a whole lot that black can really do. Sure, you still have this position where you have the passed b pawn, maybe you can hope for something, but realistically it should just be a draw. But aside from that, like there wasn't really a whole lot for either side in any of these positions. I should also note a variation I calculated out here, like if b4, right, and they try to push the pawn, instead of going for this whole rook c8 thing where they lost the pawn but still had compensation, if they go b4 and b3, I saw that I had this nice move knight c5 when, like, if they just take this, because like I'm sort of forking their knight and pawn here, well then I'm going to be in time to push my pawn up, distract the rook, take their pawn, and this is just going to be a draw pretty much. So there's also like knight d2, but realistically this doesn't actually lead anywhere. So yeah, not exactly the most thrilling game in the world. Definitely left some stuff to be desired in terms of the quality of play, but looking back over it, it did seem like, you know, there were some small chances for both sides maybe, and also one very subtle thing actually, which is a bit of a mindfuck, is that in this position, the natural rook b1, instead of that you could go rook a2, and like basically the point is that, you know, when you're down a pawn the whole game and suffering, you're going to take this position where you're up a pawn, right? Even if you think your opponent has compensation, you're going to take that, right? But it was very hard to switch my mentality and be like, oh, actually in this position, black has enough compensation, they're going to hold this, and instead go for rook a2, which stops after rook c3 this whole, instead of going to f4, by the way, I can go to b4, and they don't have this counterplay on the second rank, which maybe forces them to go back passively and defend this, but then like in this sort of position, I have some sort of edge that I can work with, right? But yeah, I definitely want to review the opening phase, find something a bit more convincing maybe. Maybe it was just going e3 if I go rook fc1, but still the nature of the position is very similar, but I probably need to study the subtleties of things a little bit better because, yeah, whatever happened in the game definitely, well, okay, that probably pans out more miscalculating things, like not really like properly considering rook takes a1 and whatnot, but okay. Don't have too much more to say about this game. So okay, it's been sort of nearing to the end for this tournament. Kind of an important round, but there was a bit of drama here as Frederick Whitfield actually, after being fairly okay the whole game against Kai Yisu, ended up losing because he was down a lot of time on the clock. Kai is known for playing like very, very quickly. He was like on 45, I don't remember the exact amount, but let's just say like 40 minutes or so while Frederick had like a minute on the clock. They had a very like equalish rook endgame, but then basically Kai just, I don't think he flagged Frederick, but I think like eventually Frederick messed up in time trouble and then like he lost. But in view of that, this top board matchup between Kian and Rishi Sardana, it ended up being a draw because Rishi saw that, oh, Frederick lost. If I offer a draw, I win the tournament, I become the Australian champion. So he did that and he won the tournament with a whole round to spare actually. But obviously there's still a bit of a fight for second place because me and myself and Yi are equal third at the moment, falling half a point behind Frederick. And then there's a bunch of other players sort of trailing behind on 6 or so points, including Daniel Malemed, who I played last round, so I'm staying with, and he in fact beat Jian Zhang, which was a nice scalp. And yeah, overall, I wasn't feeling like too amazing about the game or anything. Okay, a draw was not too bad of a result from an objective point of view, and just had to move on, focus on the last day, where I was in fact playing the second seed of the tournament, International Master Trevor Tao with the black pieces. So stay tuned for the next video to see how that unfolded, and I hope you guys all have a good day.